Well, we've got Dr. Nachi Sinha here, and you might remember him because he was on 10 times before talking about his new book, Empowered and Strong, Navigating Safely Through the Storms of Life. But we're not here to talk about that today, actually, because we're done with that. We're going to start a new series on workplace bullying. And let's bring him on. How are you today?
Well, thank you, Toby, for having me here. And yes, I have been with that 10 times.
Yes.
So yeah, so looking forward to our new conversations. Thank you.
Yeah. Now, workplace bullying, it is quite a big issue, isn't it?
Yes, you're right. Maintaining a work-life balance, of course, is a common problem in today day and age, right? So, more and more people are devoting time at, with work and bosses, companies, and so on. And some of us do it, of course, because, we love our jobs and don't mind spending extra time working. But then there's also this idea about earning some money. But the point that Toby is that regardless of what the cause is, working long hours is exhausting. So, regardless of how passionate you are about your work, if it's workplace bullying you're dealing with it, then it sort of drains the individual emotionally and mentally. So it's quite a big problem.
Mm. And what is actually meant by workplace bullying?
So that's a good question, actually. When you think about it, the larger picture, though, is kind of sort of mocking or targeted behavior towards, an individual or groups at work. The employee, in this case, the victim, let's say, is bullied by their colleagues, senior and junior, and sometimes, the bosses as well. So there was, interestingly, a research bit carried out in 2017, which indicated that about 70% of males and 30% of females are bullies. And but the women are, likely to be more of a target of bullies compared to males. And then, what was interesting also in this research was that bullying from seniors and bosses was roughly about 60%. And then from coworkers, it was about 30%. So,
Wow.
so talking about, even the juniors have sort of bullying the senior level people, and that was around 6%. So it's quite like a spread, but yeah.
Yeah. And what are the main indicators of workplace bullying? How can we actually tell that it's maybe happening to us?
That's a good point. One of the common things, the first most common thing that you would see in workplace bullying is this phenomenon called the purposeful ignoring.
Hmm.
Now, when it sounds like, what is purposeful ignoring? Suppose like a person awards an employee or ignores the suggestion or what they were saying in meetings or anything else that comes with it, and then you can see that it's almost like by purpose, which is what happens, that particular victim is being ignored. That is an indicator of bullying. And for example, you'd see that when the person is not being invited to the gatherings and meetings or they're being avoided altogether, even when they're trying to agree to try to talk and stuff, the victim becomes really isolated from the rest of the co-workers and, and the staff. And that becomes very difficult because you tend to feel alone and you suffer as well.
Yeah. And I actually have a friend who recently was verbally threatened at work. Does that count as bullying?
Right, right. Constant threats is a common problem in actually workplace bullying. Usually what happens is, I'm sorry to hear about your friend, by the way, but it's good that you brought that up, and hopefully they're hearing this because the person, usually in a senior position, sort of intimidates somebody into doing or stops them from doing something. Now, these threats would, include things like false reporting to the boss or demotion or termination from the job itself. Now, it's interesting because the manager or supervisor in any sort of situation sort of gives different responsibilities, and then they would expect the person to, to do things in a sort of unreasonably short time. So you're kind of being set up to sort of fail in many ways, and then you threaten the person with the consequences if you will fail to fulfill the responsibility. So
Yeah.
you're kind of stuck on both corners.
What does that actually look like as well? Can that cause yelling and perhaps rude behaviour?
Yes, let's get back to the basic to just to make it clear.
Hmm.
All employees, let's get that sorted deserve equal respect in the workplace. That goes without saying.
Yeah.
The organizations, have a duty to train the employees to treat everyone with courtesy and respect, right? I mean, and if an employee is yelled at by their boss or any other person in authority, I mean, that does count to bullying. I mean, aggression shown in the form of, cursing or pounding somebody's fists or belonging, kind of intimidating to the employee or victim, right? Or yelling at someone or aggressive behavior that's happening is not justifiable under any condition. So if anybody is being yelled at frequently by their boss or any of the employee and not feeling respected, I mean, I think it's important for them to know and to understand that they are a victim of workplace bullying.
Can that cause someone sometimes to feel a bit of shame, maybe, and guilt?
That's a great question because, I mean, what we go through, in our environment has an impact on our mental health and mental state, right, and our emotions. And the same thing happens here as well. I mean, the victims of workplace bullying are blamed, essentially, if anything goes wrong. So the bullies constantly imply that a particular person or a group is irresponsible or wrong. And this constant blaming, shaming, and holding the person responsible for failure sort of makes them feel guilty and embarrassed. And and this you're talking about going on again and again, it is going to cause shame and guilt. Not necessarily, sort of on a well-placed shame or guilt, for that matter, it never is. But people do struggle with that, yeah.
Yeah, and with all this stuff happening to a victim, I can't help but wonder if they're actually recognised for what they do in the workplace.
No, right. So, it's when you're asking these questions, it almost seems like that it makes so much sense, right? But you'll be surprised how sometimes we miss that because the employees are entitled to recognition and monetary compensation, right? I mean, if I'm working and I'm performing well, then I'm entitled to that, recognize my work and pay me appropriately. But what happens in workplace bullying is that the victim or the employee is not given that due credit, any appreciation or financial benefit. Now, suppose the bully is somebody who is in a managerial position. Now, you can imagine how in that case they can even take away and assign, responsibilities of projects which are, good and respectful, to take it away from the victim and give it to somebody else. And, and in severe cases of workplace bullying, the employees even stopped from promotion, and getting even basic monetary benefits that the company provides for everybody else.
Yeah. Well, that must make the victim feel quite useless, right?
Yes, it is actually one of the most damaging signs. The sense of feeling useless of workplace. It's one of the most damaging signs of workplace bullying, because the victim is made to feel that they're not good enough at the job, and others are better than them. So the bully insults the victim in front of other employees and is constantly reminding the victim of their shortcomings. I mean, again, in this case, which might not even be real. All right, so making the person feel that they're useless and not good, sort of, crushes the confidence of the victim and makes them feel inferior to the employees and co-workers. It's quite a nightmare.
Yeah. And I sometimes hear stories about employers going through employees' belongings. Does that actually happen, or are people just making that up?
Well, I mean, so let's dial back a bit. So it is the boss's right to monitor the employee and observe how they work and all that. But if one limited or few employees are constantly being monitored and interfered with while working, then that is bullying. Yeah. It's almost, it's almost as bizarre as you find that the bully sort of is lurking around the employee's desk and going to the personal belongings and, ask them endless questions while they're busy at work. So this affects the employee's concentration and performance. And then once again, it feeds in the narrative that they're not doing the job properly. Now, let's say, for example, an employer wants to observe, a person. I mean, in that case, they must be able to do it in a subtle way without being, intrusive or irritating to the employee. But if that's not the case, and if that's not the real reason, then you can see how that can be used to sort of make the life of the victim difficult.
Yeah. And if I was working at this place, I would find it quite hostile. I wouldn't really want to hang around.
Yeah, yeah. That's exactly how it would feel like, isn't it? Because, I mean, workplace bullying does include creating hostility and sort of a sense of ill feeling amongst the employees. So, I mean, the bully kind of incites, people to seek revenge or backstab their colleagues to gain recognition or appreciation from employees. I mean, it is a bad place to be. A hostile working environment also gets created when employees are being constantly critiqued for underperformance, in front of the teams and juniors. And working in a hostile environment is mentally, degrading and taxing. And even in situations where the person is getting good compensation, but there's never enough compensation for workplace bullying. Let's put that straight. So, yeah.
Absolutely. And someone else I know told me recently that a few pranks have been played on them at work,
Right.
and they're not really enjoying them. Does that count as bullying? Because maybe the people setting up these pranks, aren't doing it with any sort of bad intent.
Right. No, I get that. I mean, jokes and pranks. I mean, sometimes the idea is to kind of, break the ice or create sort of a team atmosphere and so on.
Yeah.
But that doesn't always happen. That's not always that intent, right? So, I mean, jokes directed towards a specific person due to their appearance, gender, sexuality, faith, for example, culture, or let's say nationality, color, caste, creed. I mean, if these are the reasons why the jokes are being directed to someone, then these are the signs of workplace bullying. I mean, because inherently, when you think about it, these jokes discriminate against the victim, right? Amongst the team, that kind of bring down the respect of the victim. Now, again, practical jokes, pranks. Again, if they physically hurt the employee or creates a problem for them, then they're also considered to be workplace bullying. Discriminatory jokes and pranks, these are, they have quite a negative impact on the employee's mental health. And more importantly, it doesn't just limit it to not only am I suffering because of all this, but then my work performance also gets diminished. So then there's a double whammy, right? So I'm kind of hit from both sides.
Yeah. And if an employer is making a particular employee work more hours than somebody else or come in at the weekend, is that bullying or is that just the way work works?
Right. So this is interesting because, I mean, you can clearly see how people will be thinking on, it's almost like, kind of see groups dividing and fighting on each side on this. But here's the lowdown on this. I mean, expecting the employee to do their task, perfectly, flawlessly, within a short period of time, that is unreasonable. That is just not possible. And if it's being demanded, that's unreasonable. Or expecting them to devote all their time to the company and its goals. That also counts as unreasonable demand and is actually bullying. Now, an employee shouldn't be forced to overwork or, come to work when it's not their working time. I mean, the same way they shouldn't be called or disturbed when they go home and if it's not urgent or important. See, the reason why all this is important is because many organizations sort of put undue pressure on employees to work more in a very short time, and that too perfectly. So the behavior this behavior sort of creates a culture in the company, which is basically that of bullying and is harmful for the employee's personal life. I mean, and the physical and mental health. And also performance, it's, related to work itself.
So we've talked today about the 10 signs of workplace bullying. What would be your overall message to the listener about this subject?
Yeah, thank you. Yes, we have actually talked about the 10 signs. You're right. I mean, here's what I feel about this. I mean, that's the purpose of this conversation, of course, is to get the message across that if you face any of the above signs in your workplace, it's a red flag.
Yeah.
Bullying at the workplace is detrimental to your mental health and also to your performance at work as well. So you need to make sure that you can't take concrete measures to stop it before it worsens. Now, this might seem a bit uphill, but that's the only way out of it. Ask for help and go from there. Thank you,
Yes.
Toby.
Absolutely. Well, many thanks for joining us today, and you will be back, whether you like it or not, next week to talk about the 8 steps to deal with workplace bullying. So see you then.
Thank you, Toby. See you then. Take care.